I'm excited for this one. Let's just jump right in, though. Who do you have for your most important player for this upcoming Pelicans season?
The most important player, and I know it may sound obvious, but it's Zion Williamson, who has not played more than 30 games in a season except for once in his career. Uh, this is a big season for him and the Pelicans. Their fates are intertwined. I am hesitant to say that this is the year where everything breaks right and he plays 70 plus games, but certainly uh, a good amount of games is the expectation and what people are hoping for. And
Mm-hmm.
the thing with Zion is when he's healthy, he's able to lift the team to heights that no other player on the team can bring them to. Uh, I know December standings aren't really all that important, but he had them winning at a good clip. They were very briefly, they touched the sun a little bit when they were the first seed in the West, and then it all came crashing down when he got hurt. They just did not look the same, didn't have the same identity. I don't think if you play 75 games, I don't think they're like the shoe in one seed or anything, but I
Mm-hmm.
think they're not a play-in team, right? Which is important, and they're likely a home court team, in my opinion, which is important for a small market here to host playoff games, to have playoff games, to generate that revenue. But also, I think like a lot of jobs are on the line depending on how successful the Pelican season is, and he's going to be the single biggest driver of wins. And if this is another season where they end up in the lottery and he's not healthy, I do think this is where they part ways with their current crop of stars. I'm not sure who they decide to keep or which direction they would want to go, but I would be shocked if they were to run it back with Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson and CJ McCollum to do it all
Mm-hmm.
again the next year and still have leadership intact. I feel like if this is a disappointing season, you might see a changing in who runs the show for the Pelicans.
Chris, did you have Zion?
I actually had Herb Jones. No, I had Zion. Like
Yeah.
it has to be Zion, right? Like this is all respect to Herb Jones, who I love, but Zion is the thing that can take the Pelicans from being like this team that has a lot of interesting pieces, but pieces we're unsure about and how high they can get, to a guy that could literally change the franchise and like help them. It's like, and we just have seen him do stuff that no one else really does, and like that is so rare. That is, you can't get that easily, and it would just be fun for anyone who likes basketball, who likes watching like this guy with a weird body type who can't be guarded in all these different ways do stuff. I just want to see that, and if he's hurt again, not only does it like I think affect the chances of like being a top 4 seed or whatever, but it just also is going to take so much just energy out of the sails of what this team could be, and I don't want that for Pelicans fans. I don't want that for that organization. But it feels more on the table now, just based on how far we are in his Zion's career. It's not like that far in his career, but it's far enough now where it's like kind of gotta be healthy. It's kind of put up or shut up time with Zion's health.
Yeah, I think you mentioned, Shamit, that that they touched the sun, and I think that they literally touched the Suns, and he 360 dunked his way into really announcing himself in this team back then. And there was those 2 games in a week, and it was kind of the peak of their season, I would say. I mean, maybe because I felt it so deeply. And then Devin Booker got hurt shortly thereafter, so it was an inflection point in my corner of the world too. But just thinking back to that portion of the year, I rewatched a game when both Zion and Ingram played, which obviously has, we haven't said Ingram's name a ton yet, is rare. Those guys haven't played enough together yet, and that's part of the complication of all this. But what I remember feeling around that time was that the passing and playing off of his teammates was really like kind of the step that he had taken forward from the last time we saw him, and some of the stats back that up. But it's such a small sample that I know it can be hard to kind of pinpoint growth and ups and downs. But what would you say, even not from one year to the next, but maybe just from like rookie Zion to now, have been like the improvements we have seen, and what do you think needs to be the next step beyond that?
Surprisingly, I think the biggest step forward he's taken is defense. I think he used to be a straight up liability on the court. Part of it due to his conditioning, part of it just being a young player figuring out the NBA game style and speed. And I think before he got hurt this past season, he was trending towards being not only a positive defensive player, but an impactful defensive player. One who all the on-off stats, first of all, like take them for what they are, but they were actually in his favor. And I think that's saying something. Is if you can put out not just a competent defense. The Pelicans were an elite defense while he was out there. So I'm not trying to argue that he was the driver of that elite defense. He was certainly a passenger and a participant. But the fact that you can have a unit out there where you're like, okay, I might score 120 points per possession, but I'm also giving up 120 points per possession, and that wasn't the concern with him, I thought would not have happened, when you previously saw him or even his rookie year. So I think that was his big step forward. And the other thing is, like, he took a step forward in becoming more of the defensive event generator that you saw at Duke, who just had the highlight blocks, had the crazy steals, and just would find a way to force a turnover or force a change in possession. And that's where I saw an improvement. And I think it largely correlates with his conditioning. When he's in shape to play on both sides of the court, he's a person who likes to play with a high motor. But if you're just not in shape, no matter how much you want to play with a high motor, you're not going to be able to. You're going to find yourself jogging. You're going to find yourself taking plays off. You're going to find yourself sitting in the corner on offense for multiple possessions in a row. And that aspect, I think, greatly improved. And he's also one of those players that plays himself into shape as the season goes on. And so, you were seeing that in December, he was not the guy that he was in early October. When he got hurt in January, he was not the guy that he was in the first few games in November. And so, you were like, okay, this is trending upwards. It's cascading towards something. And unfortunately, that something was injury. That's what it cascaded towards. So I think that's where he took his biggest step up. I would like to see him improve from a rebounding perspective. He's not the greatest defensive rebounder. I think he's an amazing offensive rebounder. But again, some of it's where he's being coached to leak out in transition because he is an extremely dominant force and to put pressure on the rim in that sense. I think if you go back and watch the Clippers where they had Blake Griffin and Chris Paul and DeAndre Jordan, one of the things those teams, and courtesy of Alvin Gentry, on the belief he was the one who was the assistant coach under Doc, then kind of implemented some of this early transition stuff where, off of free throws or off of missed baskets, Blake would already be down there deep in the paint, sealing off whoever was there. And then you just got to feed him the ball, and 1v1 versus Blake in the restricted area is probably going to favor Blake, right? And
Sure.
And Zion is a similar force in that area, and so some of the rebounding takes a hit in that. But I would like to, I think the team as a whole relies too much on Jonas Valanciunas to clean up the glass, and I think Zion hopefully improves in that area. And the second thing I'd like to see him improve at is just developing a little bit more of an in-between game. I don't need him to be a three-point shooter. I don't need him to be a catch-and-shoot guy. And he's not afraid to shoot them. He's not Ben Simmons. He takes them when they're available,
sure.
and it makes sense, right? But I think what will really help him is, instead of I'm going to get to the rim every single time and go through 3 or 4 defenders, can I stop and pop and rise and do a little floater, right? Can you – it's still in the paint, right? You're still 8 to 10 feet away, but that'll, I think, improve his longevity. Just it's less wear and tear. But secondly, I think those are important counters to have, especially in the playoffs, is someone's playing deep drop or someone's giving you that space, and he's very good at taking that space. But if you can just kind of go over the defense and put some stuff up, which he started to experiment with. He took a few turnaround jumpers and stuff as the season went on, but I want that to become more incorporated.
Yeah, and it's just less tiring too, right? I mean, it's especially for a guy who, we talk about it with Giannis, who's stayed way healthier. So if you're a player who has struggled with health, I would think coming up with adjustments that are not only going to keep the defense honest, but also allow you to calculate out your physical expenditure more consistently. I think that's kind of just what comes with learning the game, learning your body, learning the league, all that stuff. Some numbers to back up what you said before we pivot to the guy we're going to be talking about by the end of the year. The team forced almost 2% turnovers on almost 2% more of the possessions when Zion was on the court last year. His mid-range frequency of all shapes and sizes went up 5 percentage points last year, and his rim percentage frequency came down a little bit. And then everything, passes, turnovers, and assists all went up, which was what I was pointing out as well. So the guy is kind of an offense unto himself, but that doesn't mean that at 23 there's not some places to go. I think even if the defense has gotten better, I think we'd all like to see him become an even more of a difference maker, make good on some of the promise we saw at Duke as well. But yeah, this guy is obviously the most important player on this team. But let's pivot to some of the less talked about players, maybe who we might end up talking about. Chris, who do you have as the New Orleans player we'll be talking about by the end of the year?
So my initial thought was to go Trey Murphy, but the injury to me, I think, just kind of, I wanted to move to someone else. I think we still could talk about him. It's not like he's necessarily going to be out the whole year, but I went Dyson Daniels. I really went going back and watching some of his film, in particular on defense, very intrigued. He is was willing as a very young rookie to play defense, challenge defense, to step up in that way. I think Very was aware of what he was and what he isn't. And I think that's a really good sign for someone that young, to be kind of aware of what he's kind of going through. The challenge is the offense. I mean, you can go look at his numbers anywhere, counting stats, advanced numbers, whatever, and the offense is tricky. I mean, cleaning the glass, if you look at his three-point accuracy, 31%, 35% for the corners, 29% on non-corners. Those are numbers that are brutal if you're going to be a wing that's going to stick in the league. But I believe in the framework. I believe in the size. I'm really fascinated by Dyson Daniels, and I want to see him, grow out of playing 57 games last year, under 20 minutes a game, and let's see if that role can get boosted. Let me ask you about this. If you had to bet on one of him or Herb Jones to be a more competent offensive player in 2 years, who would you bet who has a better chance of figuring it out?
Man, that is a tough question. I think last year at draft time, I would have said no question Dyson. I was pretty big on Dyson coming into the draft. Herb has improved a ton on offense. Specifically, I think he's just very aware, like you said about Dyson, of what he is and what he isn't. And as a cutter, as a slasher, as a transition guy, as a finisher, Herb knows where he can slot it. The problem with Herb Jones is that good teams force guys like Herb to increase their usage on offense. And when guys like Herb are increasing their usage on offense, it means very directly Zion or BI or Trey or someone else is decreasing their usage. That usage is coming from somewhere, right? There's a set number of possessions. And so I'm not confident that Herb's someone that can eat up a bunch of offensive possessions come playoffs where hey, we're going to deploy the Tony Allen approach on you and either you do something or you don't, but Zion's not beating us or Brandon's not beating us, you're going to beat us. And that's a prospect that scares me. But I think you could say Dyson is kind of worse off in the regard that he's a lower usage player than Herb, and he doesn't necessarily have the same, I guess, cutting acumen yet, or even in transition. He's definitely not the finisher that Herb is. And Herb's just better at the free throw line, which is huge. And I think Dyson's a little bit afraid to get to the line at the moment because he's not the greatest there. Certainly something that he puts in a lot of work in. What Dyson would need to do to become a better offensive player than Herb is one of them's got to win the battle of who can become a reliable three-point shooter, a catch-and-shoot guy. Because Dyson, unfortunately, his best traits may be putting him on the ball. He's just never going to be a better on-ball option than Brandon Ingram or CJ McCollum or Zion Williamson, not in the short term, right? It's just, that's something for developmentally, you feed him possessions, you empower him to make decisions, and, hopefully the returns pay off down the road, but you're never going to get the ball to him in clutch and be you're the guy, make big plays. but he's got to play. I think his like ability to play the connector role is the fact that he's an elite rebounder for his position, and I think his shot mechanics are actually very, very, very good. The problem is he's just got to get the shot volume. He can't be a guy that takes 3 field goals attempts a game because that guy does not exist, and teams will not guard him. And there's just you'll just be a massive, massive sink on offense. But because of his other skills, he has a pathway to be a much better offensive player than Herb. But it's all going to depend on his level of aggression on offense and which one of those two can sort of become the superior 3-point shooter. Because if they're both going to be bad 3-point shooters, Herb's going to be the better offensive player. He's just a better finisher and more aggressive at the rim.
I had EJ Liddell as my guy that we're going to be talking about. I'm not sure if he's going to play, is kind of the part of it that maybe is worth talking about here. But, 2 years of solid 3-point shooting in college, looked physically back to normal. I mean, I guess, whatever your mileage may vary on that at Summer League this year. And to me, just feels like the kind of player that we've already seen succeed on this team with the types of lineups that they put out there. Guys like Najee Marshall, even Larry Nance, like there's just a vision for what Liddell can do and ideally, be a little bit more of an offensive weapon as a scorer than those guys. But I just think on a team that it pretty much has to be Dyson or him, as far as what you're looking for somebody to potentially break out. I think Trey Murphy's already gotten talked about personally. So maybe the mainstream NBA fan is going to really know his name, but I think he's proven himself already. So what do you think, Shamit? Is this guy going to get time this year? Is he somebody that, by March we get pretty intrigued by, or is it still a year away?
He has a more difficult pathway than Dyson to break into the rotation. But this is a team that severely lacks big man depth. And outside of JV, their big men are known to get hurt and miss time. So they like to close with Larry Nance at the 5 for most of their games. And that's the look they like to deploy. And EJ kind of fits that Larry Nance mold where it's like, okay, you're a tweener big. You can play make a little, you can connect a little, you can kind of offer some weak side rim protection. You can do Larry Nance-ish things, right? Larry might be a better athlete. I think EJ's a better scorer, a better offensive threat. So if and when Larry misses time, I'm certain they're going to try to incorporate EJ in for bursts, right? You give him 2-3 minute stretches. You want to play him with your best players. You don't want to put him with you don't want to put him with like an all bench lineup. You don't want him out there with no shooting and no creation and all of that. But you put him out there with Zion and CJ and BI, and you're like, okay, you're focusing on 2 or 3 things. You're really not trying to extend your role into something you're not. Just focus on those 2 or 3 goals and try to be good. Then maybe he can start working his way into the rotation. I think that's the way he has to crack it. The other thing is, again, we talked about rebounding. None of these guys that I've named are rebounders. So if he can prove day one that he's gonna be the guy that attacks the defensive glass and can terminate possessions that way, then he's gonna get minutes because this team needs rebounding. Unfortunately for him, that they can also play Dyson at the 4. They can play Dyson 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe 5, depending on whatever rotation. They've played Herb at the 5. Dyson's a better rebounder and honestly a better rim protector in my opinion than Herb. So he's got to convince the coaching staff that he can provide something other than Dyson in those minutes. And yeah, that's going to be his pathway. So I'm optimistic. I think he is a solid shooter, and that is probably what's going to get him on the court.
Who did you have for the guy we're going to be talking about?
I think it has to be Brendon Ingram. Surprisingly, again, it might be an obvious.
Is he not already we know what this guy is? Is this isn't he already kind of Brendon Ingram is Brendon Ingram? I don't feel like there is unless he's gonna. Are you saying can he get to a top 15 level? Is that kind of where we're wondering where this is headed? Is that your optimism there?
So the reason he's got to be the person you're talking about, there's a few things going on here. First of all, he's going to be extension eligible. and he's going to potentially have the supermax on the line depending on his performance this season. So he's got that riding for him. If he qualifies for an All NBA team, there's that. Two, like with Zion, kind of his future and the Pelicans' future, like they're intertwined. If he has a bad season, you think of the deals that they have allegedly turned down or potentially turned down or whatever the case may be to keep Brandon Ingram. They believe in this guy. Had an opportunity to get Scoot Henderson, not moving Brandon Ingram for him, right? Had an opportunity to throw your name in the KD sweepstakes back in the day, before the Suns got him, not putting Brandon Ingram in that deal. Damian Lillard, not putting Brandon Ingram in that deal. So, like, there's a number of pathways that they could have gone down, both from a legitimate star standpoint and a resetting your clock and betting on somebody else standpoint, that they have actively chosen not to pursue because they believe in him that much. And typically when teams believe in guys that much, they're going to hand him whatever money he wants. He's going to be eligible for the 30% max. Is he going to be eligible for 35? I don't know. However, the thing with Brandon Ingram is he's been inconsistent. He's been injured almost as much as Zion, although not quite as much as Zion. But he misses almost 30 games a year, right? And that's tough to build around when your other guys also missing that much time. So if this is one of those years where he's not taking that step towards, like he may not get all NBA, but if he's not at least entering himself in that conversation, then they have to seriously decide how they want to approach the summer where he is extension eligible. Do you want to hand him that 5-year contract, pay him, $240 million or whatever that number is going to be? I don't know what that number is going to be, and decide, hey, like, we're a team that hasn't won at a high level, but we're going to continue to invest in a guy that also hasn't won at a high level. You look at his career. This past season was the only time he's had a winning season in his whole career. The only time. And sure, like, circumstances have been bad. Zion missed all that time, but it's not like BI was like the driver behind the winning season. Like, a lot of those wins came when Zion was healthy, right? When BI first came back from injury, they went like 2 for 13 over a 15-game stretch when he first came back. And it's like, that should not be happening if this is a guy that you're going to build around. So it's a pivotal season for him. He's got to show that he's consistently like a top 25, top 20, top 50, like something approaching that, rather than a guy that's closer to top 50, which is like, I think depending on who you ask, there's a lot of people who think like his impact's probably closer to a top 50 player. And then you ask some other folks, you're like, no, he's got everything. He's got he can rebound, he can play make, he can score from anywhere, 3-level scorer. Like, he's a top 25 guy, no question. And so, like, I think there is a question if he's a top 25 guy, and this is a year for him to solidify that he is. And if he's not, then they have to move in a different direction.
Yeah, those are the contracts that screw teams. Zach LaVine, like these are the ones that if you do it when you're not sure, and that there is a question around some element of whether they can be a driver of winning as one of the best players on a championship team, but yet you pay them like they are, then that's really how you get yourself into trouble. So I think it's a great call. We can zoom through the rest of this. I think best lineup actually is a great place to jump. I had some stats. Zion and Ingram played 241 minutes together last year. That was a plus 13 net rating for whatever that's worth. They were, I believe, 7-5 when both players played in games. And then this one was kind of interesting. 155 total passes between the two of them in those 241 minutes versus 578 passes between Zion and CJ in the 620 minutes that they played together. Just a little bit of a, random way to show it, but those guys have not been incorporated together quite as much. At times it's just one of them screening for the other. It really can be that simple, but again, you got to see it for a long period of time, I think. So last year, the best lineup for this team, which we can move to now, was McCollum, Murphy, Ingram, Herb, Jones, and Larry Nance of the high volume lineups. So, Chris, I'll let you go. What is your best lineup this year for the Pelicans? Which one do you think by the end of the year is going to be the best statistically?
So this is a little bit of a tricky one because, as we've hit on, I think, kind of talking around this, injuries last year really, I think, impacted a lot of us being able to project a lot of this forward. Like, I think that is a real part of this. I think you are doing some bit of projection with this. I think that is inherently part of the work we have to do with this team is guessing a little bit. So I'm willing to be told that this is wrong and stupid, but Lord knows.
Okay.
So I just went with the 5 guys that I like, and I skewed a little bit smaller. I went CJ, who we haven't really talked about, but like it's still a good player. Like he's still a good player who's going to get buckets. Trey Murphy when he gets back, Brandon Ingram, Zion, and Larry Nance. It has some size. It can switch a little bit with Larry. He can do some of the centery things that Zion, like maybe you don't want to have him do if you're trying to keep him healthy. Larry doesn't love to do the, hey, can you like guard Joel Embiid for a couple possession stuff? Because he's not that big, but he can do it if you ask him to do it and you incentivize him to do it. You get all your shooting on the floor. It's really long on the wing. It's just putting the talent that I trust to function on both ends of the floor, all on the floor together. Anchored by Zion. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, it's the one from last year that I listed, but with Zion and Herb Jones' place, and I think that makes absolute sense. I went away from Trey just because I am uncertain, but I think if he's able to get back to relatively normal, the shooting there, I would imagine he's going to drive some of their better lineups because it's the NBA and shooting tends to do that. So I'll go real quick. My best lineup for the 2024 New Orleans Pelicans, CJ McCollum. Yes, you're right. He is going to orchestrate and initiate and get buckets and be a floor spacer. I have Herb Jones here. I think the off ball and spot up and cutting and transition, he has figured out how to be a good offensive player for the most part in the regular season. I think Brandon Ingram will be in this lineup, of course. Two-way wing. We know what Brandon Ingram is. He has to be out there for them to be at their best. Zion Williamson, he is an offense. If he's out there, we'll be pretty happy. And then Larry Nance, that's their closing center. They like to switch. They like to be 5 out. They like to be versatile, and Nance is their answer there. So that's my 5. Who do you have, Shamit?
I'm going to preface this by saying that I am not a fan of the Nance at the 5 lineups. I know statistically they were good. I have zero faith in them versus like any like legitimate team and teams that are big. I just think a lot of the reason those Nance at the 5 lineups were really good was, one, Zion was just destroying everything in his path at that time, and 2, a lot of those lineups overlapped with Jose as well. So it was like the 3-man trio of Jose, Zion, Larry. Those lineups demolished opponents from the second quarter, like the first few minutes to like the 6-minute mark, whatever, the first time out. In those minutes, they would just destroy teams, just absolutely destroy teams. And I think the bulk of the net rating was built in those minutes. And I think like in the fourth quarter versus bad teams, similarly, like the Zion and Larry, like they're built to beat bad teams. Second you run into like Memphis, second you run into Milwaukee, they got their butts kicked by the Jazz multiple times. They got their butts kicked by the Magic, who weren't a good team because they couldn't match with the size. I think Larry at the 5's, like, in my opinion, a gimmick, and a gimmick that works well against bad teams.
So what's your 5?
Knowing that that's a gimmick and knowing that that's how they want to play, I think statistically their best 5 lineup from the beginning is probably just going to be the one they used last year, which is CJ, Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, Larry Nance, and Zion. So 2 non-shooters, a Zion and then CJ and Brandon. They're just, for whatever reason, that's going to be a very good lineup because not for whatever reason, for the reasons I stated above. Like, they're going to beat a lot of bad teams by a very big margin, and the games they're going to lose is going to be a small margin, and so like the net ratings are going to be insane. The lineups that I really, really want to see are I want to see like an all shooting lineup with Zion. So give me CJ, Brandon Ingram, Trey, Zion, and literally anybody else who can shoot. So if that happens to be Jordan Hawkins, I want to see it. I just want to see like what the offensive the offense can get to. But most likely that 5th guy is probably going to be Herb. So like we're going to get Zion at the 5 or Herb at the 5. So I think that would be an interesting crew. I want to see a Zion and JV based lineup that has shooters. So CJ, Trey, Brandon, Zion, JV.
I could see that one being statistically good too. If I mean, all of this is assuming health, right? But like that one does feel like you could get there because it cleans up some of the rebounding and size and interior stuff.
That's the big thing is like, can you do the opposite gimmick where you're generating possessions by hitting the glass, the offensive glass? You're generating possessions. Well, you're not generating them, but like you're maintaining possession efficiency by getting to the line a million times because you're spaced out and you got two bruisers, inside. You're not giving up possession efficiency on the other end because Larry can't rebound the ball, or like Herb can't rebound the ball. Like that's something I want to see them play around with more is like, hey, get your two big bruisers and put shooters around them and see if you can get creative with it. I am rooting for the lineup I'm rooting for that I hope materializes is Dyson, Trey, BI, Zion, and Herb. That's the lineup I'm rooting for is like, instead of Larry, try it with Dyson. You have more of a playmaker and just sprint, just play in transition the whole time. Like see what happens. But we'll see. What I really want is for them to get some sort of a big man that can shoot. Like if Larry could shoot threes, I would love that. But you just give up so much in the math game with him not rebounding well and him just really not being an offensive threat in any sense. So like typically the advantages of going small are we're going to space you out. We're going to get up a lot of threes, and that's going to be our trade-off for not rebounding the ball, right? That's how we're going to balance it out. And because we shoot a lot of threes, we're probably going to get to the rim a lot too. Mm-hmm. Well, you lose that with Larry because what they do is they just put their big man on Larry and plant him in the paint. You're like, all right, cool. Larry's not going to take those threes, so you're not getting to the rim a lot. Well, Zion's going to get to the rim no matter what, but like you're losing that. You're losing the three-point volume. You're losing the rebounding math. So the only thing you're gaining out of it is their ability to switch 1 through 5, which they were very, very good at in generating turnovers. So like that's kind of how they did it, and then they relied on Zion being the most like efficient offensive machine that this franchise has ever seen. Like, all right, you just go get us points, and it's like cool. Sure. Like he will create opportunities, which is why I think it's a gimmick. It's like he's gonna do that in my opinion, regardless of who's on the court. So like let's try to find a better fit there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Giannis is obviously a game-changing defender in a way that Zion isn't, but it as far as how you can build teams and some of the pitfalls you want to avoid, I do think the roster construction and lineup construction, like they just allow you to get away with stuff because they're going to create efficient possessions because they just live in the paint like that, and it's going to be interesting. I guess we're already so far into Zion's career, but like how they work around that versus how the Bucks did and vice versa. I think we hit on best and worst case pretty well throughout this. They have the potential to be a top 4 team in the West. They already were for a portion of last year that wasn't small. And worst case, I think Shamit said it well. This was kind of what I had of like people's jobs are going to be lost, whether that's players, coaches, executives. If things don't feel better and the win column doesn't show that they're better, people will be moved on from, let's say. But the over-under is 44.5. I had the under. Feel bad saying that, but here's the case. I mean, they were a 46 win team statistically last season with only 73 combined games from Ingram and Zion. Like, that's the starting point. But I also think the depth feels a little more shaky with Graham and Richardson gone. The depth is just younger. I guess I don't want to say shaky, but the vets are gone, and then Alvarado and Murphy dealing with injuries. We didn't bring this up. They don't run, which you mentioned a little bit, Shamit, so I would like to see them do that more. They also got a little lucky defensively last season. Teams only shot 34% from 3 against them, which was like a big decrease from the previous year, and that tends to be random. I don't think anything really about their defense like contributed to that too much where it would jump that way, so you would expect that to regress. Do they get worse statistically on defense just as a result, lose a half a game and a half more because of that? And then on the flip side, it's like, okay, but last year could have also just been a worst case scenario health-wise. So it's one I would not bet, but I had the under. What did you have, Chris?
I just went over. I'm in my optimistic era. Just give me. I'm gonna just give me 60 games of Zion, healthier of Ingram. Daniels maybe take a step forward. They're just healthier, and like even with this Trey Murphy injury hanging over them, I'm just gonna will into the universe a slightly more normal, less chaotic season for this team, and bet on the town a little bit and hope for good things in the world. And let's get to like 48 wins. I'm not confident in that though.
I love the smiling and the just the spring meadow, waterfalls, all the good vibes are coming in. What do you got, Shamit?
Yeah, and I'm gonna put on Phoebe Bridgers after this and cry. So like, who am I to say, Brendon?
Yeah, it's balance. That's all.
Yeah.
Look, my advice for people, who might want to gamble on the Pelicans, as someone who's covered them for a very long time, do not ever put your money on this team. You will regret it.
fair.
But if you are
Yes.
degenerate, and you are optimistic, the reason to be optimistic is they hold a treasure chest worth of assets. I think people know their jobs are on the line. They're starting the season in the tax for the first time ever. They're in the tax. Like, obviously, like, they can get out of it by the end of the season, yada, yada, yada. To me, my reading of the tea leaves is they are prepared to stay in the tax and make a move for somebody that's a true needle mover. I think they know what's at stake here. So if you're an optimist, that's what you're betting on. You know, by December or January or February, whenever the trade deadline rolls around, they have someone else that's on their team that can make a significant impact, or multiple, someone else's. So that's, if you're a true degenerate, that's your light at the end of the tunnel.
Love it.
Oh,
All right.
sorry, I didn't mention. I would say go under.
Okay.
So to be safe.